Hello and welcome to our talk show today. So, as you guys know, Malaysia has been changing our political situations, and it has been around 6 days after our 14th general election, and there's a lot of things that's going on in our politics. And today, we are very honored to be having someone to talk about the political scene in Malaysia, which is Dr. Helena Varki. She's the lecturer from Department of International Studies and Strategic from University of Malaya, Faculty of Arts and Social Science. I would like to welcome you to our set.
Thank you.
And thank you for letting us to have you here to talk about the political scene in Malaysia.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right. Okay. So I think we shall start because Malaysia has been known for being the leading countries in Asian, mostly in political economics and also religious practices focusing on Islam. And with the changing political scene nowadays, that we know that it's after about 60 years, it's the first time we change our political party to run the government. So, how do you see the Asian country has been accepting these decisions of the citizens regarding our new political era of Malaysia?
Okay, well, first of all, the person central to all this is Mahathir. And Mahathir is part of sort of the old leadership of ASEAN as well. So with Suharto and as well with Lee Kuan Yew. So he's coming back to that era again, you see. So I think this is a very interesting thing because the ASEAN became great when these three leaders were actually in charge. And during Mahathir's time, that was when we got Myanmar into ASEAN, and then it became our 10 that we are still until today. And of course, the other leaders have left, they have retired, they have passed away, but Mahathir has come back now into ASEAN. But the ASEAN that he has come back to is quite different. It is no longer the ASEAN that is signified or signified by these autocratic leaders that were so famous for their own reasons, good and bad. So I think because Mahathir is back, it's a revival of an old ASEAN, so to speak. But I think he's not the same Mahathir that was in the help back then. So I think what will happen to ASEAN right now, or what will happen to the Malaysia's position in ASEAN will be, I think, quite positive and quite much more, I think all the leaders, all the ASEAN leaders will be waiting to see how different Mahathir is right now. And I think definitely everybody will not expect the same old Mahathir, the same old person who was in ASEAN previously and had the same policies as well. So it's very interesting times in ASEAN, and I think Malaysia will definitely become again one of the major players. In the past, people always talk about Indonesia being the big brother of ASEAN. So now we may find a shift, hopefully, to a more central Malaysia in ASEAN.
All right. So when we talk about Mahathir's, when you talk just now, like maybe the other leaders in the country, like maybe won't be expecting Mahathir to repeat the same policies. As we know, when the previous time when Mahathir used to lead Malaysia, he's almost focusing on the anti-West policy. So, do you think that the anti-West policy is still relevant for Mahathir to carry in this new era of political scene in the world?
Right, that's a good question. We don't really know actually at this point what would be Malaysia's or Mahathir's foreign policy sort of priorities, because I think he has a lot of things to handle locally at this time. But yeah, definitely you're right in terms of some of the key policies that Mahathir put into place are very, not really anti-West, but more pro-third world, pro-East. So, but I think a lot of the things that he was addressing back then are things that we over time have been able to resolve, like Japan now being also continuing to rise and Southeast Asia coming out of their crisis at the time. So the third world is in a much better position now. So I'm not sure whether it's going to be that important to have such an anti-West stance in order for the third world like Malaysia to progress. So Mahathir might, I'm not sure Mahathir will do, but then I think perhaps in the current times where third world countries like Malaysia are much better positioned already, thanks to what he has done also in the past, we may not need to take such a strong anti-Western stance, but instead more strategic, maybe not so general, maybe specific countries would be targeted better. And I think the regional partnership will be very important because during Mahathir's time, you know, relations with countries like Singapore wasn't very good, especially because of the relations or the history between Lee Kuan Yew and Mahathir. So I think there's a chance to sort of rebuild the trust between Mahathir and the new set of leaders in the country. I mean, to move away from this history and strengthen the community. So I think the ASEAN community has a good opportunity to become much more vibrant and stronger right now.
So when we talk about the third world country that already developed from the previous Mahathir's leadership, so do you think that like United States of America has already cancelled their TPPA participations, and also do you think that Asia should stay between the Asian community themselves to make them stronger and only make economic relations maybe between them, or just maybe China is one of the strongest economies in the world nowadays, or should they at least like make a slight relationship with the US, or yeah, what is your opinion?
Well, the US has always been a very important economic partner to Malaysia, so I don't think that will change much. But one of the interesting things or developments that I think will happen in the next few months of the leadership would be to see how would Malaysia's relationship with China change. With the US, I think relatively we've been quite stable, even though like our former Prime Minister has been really trying to expand and build up economic ties with China. But despite that, we've been able to what we call balance against the two major powers. But with this new leadership, it will be very interesting to see how does Mahathir respond to all of the links that was forged by the previous government with China for development projects and for a lot of investments both ways. Would he still see China as a priority, as an alternative power in the region to help with the development of the region? So I think that would be the most interesting thing, because during the previous government, it was a bit ironic in the sense that despite all of the racial tensions that were going on locally, the relationship with China mainland was flourishing and very much encouraged by the government. So we have to see how that is reconciled now in the new Malaysia.
That's an interesting thoughts of you. All right, so I want to ask you, like when Mahathir used to lead our country previously, it was like a very good era with him and Indonesia, like Suharto and Lee Kuan Yew himself. So how do you see Malaysia and Indonesia relationship when Mahathir is now back in action?
Actually one of the most, I think historically we can see the relationship between Mahathir and Suharto was very friendly, very warm, despite all of the issues that we had with the foreign workers and some cultural issues. But these two were I think Mahathir actually used the word brothers to describe their relationship before. So they were always very close and they always had very good relations. It's interesting to compare this with Lee Kuan Yew's legacy, where it was a bit more tense in that sense, but I think they still had a huge respect for each other. For Singapore, now we see Lee Kuan Yew's son is now in charge. But for Indonesia, we have not seen that legacy pass on. So we have a totally new leader and who was not very much involved in international level politics during Mahathir's time. So Jokowi now does not have that baggage, that historical baggage that would be attached to Suharto's legacy, for example. So I think it's a totally new relationship that we can expect from Jokowi and Mahathir. And even during the previous leadership's time, the relationship between Jokowi and Najib is relatively new as well, because Jokowi just came in a few years previously. So there hasn't been much time, or there wasn't really much of an establishment of a real significant signature relationship between the two. So I think with this new dynamic between Jokowi, which is much younger of course, and Mahathir, it would be really open to any possibility. There's no historical baggage. And Jokowi actually, if I'm not mistaken, one of the things that he picked up on when Mahathir won the elections was that he commented on the peaceful transition of power. So this is one of the key things that Jokowi, even during his time when he took over, was very important. Peaceful transition of power, peaceful democratic process. So I think that started out the relationship with a huge amount of respect in terms of Malaysia is capable, and Indonesia, of course, is very proud of the fact that they're a huge country, but still they can maintain the democratic process. They're very proud of being a democratic country with a lot of freedoms. So Malaysia can now stand, tall and confident beside our big brother Indonesia to say that, okay, we also can do this. We also have the same ability as Indonesia to run our country properly and to have a proper democratic process, and we are equal, and we can start our relationship on this basis.
Interesting. So based on what you said just now, we already have the same common ground within our politics that we achieve that in harmony and celebrating the celebration of diversity in our politics. So because Malaysia and Indonesia especially, we had a lot of quite a very tension issues like the environmental issue like when we were talking before this interview just now, the haze issues. We come to quite a very tense time to get past that. So how do you see with the new Mahathir's reign in Malaysia, this kind of problem can be solved or something?
In terms of the haze, a few things come to my mind. One of the things is Mahathir's approach to environmentalism itself. So Mahathir, one of the things that he made very clear during his previous prime ministership was he's totally in support of third world countries using their natural resources to develop and to get the income that they need to develop. And it's a God-given right that we can use, and we should use. So of course this issue with haze is very sensitive and very tied into the use of natural resources. So I think that will be very interesting to see how Mahathir tackles the haze problem because of this, because his old approach to environmentalism was that nobody should be able to tell us how we handle our natural resources. But today we see in ASEAN at least, everybody is hopefully trying to cooperate and tell each other and help each other and teach each other how to best handle all of these different land use and fire control, all this kind of stuff. So I think Mahathir comes into ASEAN which is quite different than before. We are willing, or rather we are hoping for a collective action in order to solve these kind of problems. So we have to see how he reacts to this. And I think Jokowi is also very serious about handling the haze. And I think with Mahathir coming in, I think but like I said before, it's a different Mahathir. I'm sure he has changed his mindset a lot. So it's very interesting to see whether he will still use the same arguments and the same mindset as before, how he views the environment. Hopefully it has changed for the positive. Yeah.
All right, okay. So just one last question, because we've seen in this new political era of Malaysia, there's a lot of youth leadership, and then the voters themselves, 49% are among the youth. So what do you think the roles of youth that you can see for the future of the new political era, and what is the role as academician yourself to encourage this young generation to participate more in the country policy making themselves?
Actually, the role of the youth is very interesting right now because we have our oldest ever prime minister, which is essentially voted in by the youth of the country. So it's an interesting dynamic between the young and old in Malaysia. And I think, you do mention, you do point out that the academics like me, I think we have the privilege of having a good relationship with the youth, and we see our students on a daily basis, and we do. For me personally, I find a certain amount of responsibility in trying to make sure that I am saying the right things. I'm influencing my students in the right way. So I think importantly, we must. Some of the messages that academicians must portray or share with their students is that we are living in a new Malaysia now. Things are fair. Things will be moving slowly towards real meritocracy. So students have to rely on their own abilities now. And if you work hard, you will be able to achieve things. If you work hard and there's no more shortcuts anymore. And in the old Malaysia, perhaps we can rely on certain shortcuts or rely on certain things in our ICs or anything like that. But we have to face the reality. So everybody just has to work hard and everybody has to stand up for themselves. And if you do well, you can succeed. So I think in the new Malaysia, everything is possible, no matter your background and who you are.
Right. That's a very interesting message from Dr. Helena herself that in this new era of our political scene in Malaysia, there's nothing that is impossible. So I would like to conclude our discussion just now by saying that there's a lot of possibilities with this new era of our political scene, with Dr. Mahathir coming back as our Prime Minister. So we have a lot of things to watch in the future. And as a youth and young generation ourselves, we shouldn't just sit down and just wait. We should just participate. And if we can do this big change in our administrations and political era in our country ourselves, then I think as a youth, nothing is impossible for us. So I would like to thank you, Dr. Helena, once again for allowing yourself to be with us and share a little bit of your thoughts about our political era. So I hope we can continue this kind of discussion more in the future. So I would like to thank you once again, and I'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.